Hello and welcome to another episode of the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. I'm Matthew Darlett, editor-in-chief of the Science of Psychotherapy, and as always, here with the amazing Richard Hill.
I'm fabulous to be amazing. I don't feel so amazing. Got a bit of a chesty thing. Oh, stuff going around, winter changing, all that stuff. But we keep getting these wonderful speakers that we're experiencing from the Holistic Recovery Summit.
Yep.
Remember, everybody just go in and click on the links on our pages to go and sign up to that for free.
Mhm.
But this is a really interesting subject, and it's a subject that Susie, my partner, is very well versed in, as she's a lifestyle medicine practitioner herself. And it's talking about eating
Mm.
and the nature of there's eating, there's emotional eating, there's physical frameworks. And we've got this wonderful, fabulous, fascinating person from England. Tell us all about her.
Okay, we're going to go across and talk to Dr. Helen McCarthy. Now, she's a clinical psychologist and author of How to Retrain Your Appetite. And at the summit, she'll be talking on overcoming emotional eating with the new science of behavior change.
Really interesting. And we've just got a word or two here about the summit. Have a listen.
If you're interested in deepening your understanding of addiction and how best to treat it, you might want to check out the Holistic Recovery Summit. This is a free online conference which brings together 35 world-leading clinical psychologists, researchers, and practitioners who will share with you their best practices for mind, body, social, and spiritual approaches to addiction treatment, enabling you to be at the forefront of evidence-based care. With a lineup including Stephen Porges, Janina Fisher, Ian McGilchrist, Pat Ogden, Anna Lemke, Stephen Hayes, Richard Schwartz, and 28 others, this really is a once-in-a-lifetime learning opportunity. The best bit is it's 100% free to attend live, and you can do so from the comfort of home. You'll also be able to upgrade to your recordings and certification pass after registration, although this is entirely optional. For more information, please check out the sign-up link in the description.
Dr. Helen McCarthy, thank you so much for joining us here on the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. It's great to meet you.
Great to meet you both. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh no, it's a great pleasure. And Richard here, lovely to meet you. This is such an interesting and important topic that you cover. And you say eating, what we put in our mouths, what our bodies do with it. And we just spoke briefly before, but there still is so little understanding about this. And so it's just interesting. What got you into this area and then writing these fabulous books that you've been writing?
The thing that started me off was when I was working with a patient. I've been a clinical psychologist for 34 years, and about 12 years ago, I was working with a patient who developed an eating disorder. And out of a chance remark by her, I realized that although as professionals, many of us have been trained to help people with eating disorders, and we can sometimes really help people a great deal with diagnosable eating disorders. We didn't really have much to offer people who just want to change how they eat in a more ordinary, everyday way. And millions and millions of people are struggling with that, with being encouraged, pushed, finding themselves eating more than they intend, either because they eat beyond the point of being full, they eat because they've just seen something, or they've seen something advertised, or they've developed cravings, or they've started finding that emotional eating is something that's happening regularly. Those sorts of issues, which don't aren't about disordered eating, but they're about really create a lot of unhappiness and misery around eating. So I got really interested in this.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting that there was one particular experiment that absolutely grabbed me in doing it, where they were actually doing teaching a class, academic class on a master's degree or something on eating, and they were talking about overeating and the way we apply things. Is talking about sizes of plates and all kinds of stuff. So they spent a week studying this stuff, and at the end of the week, they did a smorgasbord. Just take your plate around, unbeknownst to the participants. They were measuring and weighing the plates, and every single student overfilled their plate. despite a week of knowledge. So these sort of, what are they? Inner pressures, instincts? Are they, what drives people to just grab what food is available when it's available like that?
Well, in one sense, it's to do with evolution, isn't it? It's to do with how our bodies evolved, and our minds, because our minds evolved alongside our bodies. So evolutionary psychology is at play here, as well as evolutionary biology. And we evolved to deal with conditions of unpredictable food supply. So everything about how we relate to food, in terms of our ancient biology and psychology, is about scoring food when we can, and maybe eating more than we need, because our bodies have developed to store it so that we don't have to eat it the same amount every day. We've got the capacity to store food for lean periods. But now we live in an environment where those lean periods aren't happening in the same way, because we've got an oversupply. Many of us have an oversupply of food, which for many people is affordable. And there are whole issues around affordability and the sorts of foods that are cheaper. But that said, we've got a completely different food environment from the one that we evolved to live in. And many of the attempts to help people with this have focused on helping people to try and return to how we might have eaten years ago. So going back to unprocessed or minimally processed foods. But I think there's a case to be made for actually, what I try and focus on is helping people to start where they are now and work on one thing at a time. This is where the science of behavior change comes in, that changing how you eat overnight is massively challenging. Whereas if you just take one thing at a time and focus on that, you're giving yourself a much greater chance of being able to sustain the changes that you make.
Yeah. And I'm assuming because your physiology is adapting with each tiny change, that that you can manage that. Now I was just thinking, the food industry sort of knows how we're built, right? And
Yes.
And high, they're very rich, high calorie, highly processed foods are kind of what we are desiring for survival's sake, even though we don't need that for survival. In educating people now, I know, Richard, you just gave that example of people being educated and just didn't make any difference whatsoever. But surely there is a bit of an argument for getting people to understand exactly what is happening in this process of consuming, over consuming. Are you finding that, or do we have to go to just like you said, do these micro behavioral changes to lead people?
Well, I think that for some people, the impact of understanding what's happening in the food environment is massive. So what I find is that when I encourage people to read David Kessler's book on overeating, and very much more recently, Chris Van Tulleken's book, Ultra Processed People, people's usual response to that is to feel very angry because they feel manipulated by this food industry. It's not like big evil food industry, but there are things about it that make people angry, and that can bring about change. But most of the processes that are involved in eating are not conscious, rational decisions. Okay. So we need to take into account the fact that a lot of what's going on when we're overeating is basically to do with regulation of our internal state. So it's about discovering what helps to manage our autonomic nervous system reactivity, which is where this, I think, fits into the overall summit, really. That when we discover that particular foods have particular effects on our bodies and minds, we're going to reach for those foods again when we're in an uncomfortable state. And any amount of education, any amount of information is just not operating at the level that those processes are operating at. So the point about the micro behavioral changes really is that you can get very focused on, well, is this actually a case of you just You just need to learn to adjust down the size of your meals, say? Or is it that the thing that is keeping you at a weight you don't want to be at is that you find that you always turn to food when you're stressed or bored or whatever it is? And in those cases, emotional eating, the thing to say about emotional eating is about emotions and emotion regulation. It's not really about eating. It's just like your drug of choice, in effect.
And there's lots of cues and clues and and things that externally, films everywhere, the crying person, eating a tub of ice cream. And but just a quick aside, with that experiment where they ate too much, Matt, that was good. They did put better food on their plate. But they still filled it up. But and I mean, there are complex sort of technical issues. There's insulin resistance. There's there's addictive qualities of dopaminergic frameworks. So there's all kinds of technical things. How do you manage that? How do you find are people, I would imagine, just varied in what they're able to perceive or what is helpful for them? What do you do?
What I do is look at which specific eating patterns people are unhappy with. And usually, so I've got a sort of checklist. It's not a free checklist on my website that just prompts people to think about what specifically is sort of wrong with their eating in terms of their own point of view. So is it that they're eating too large portions, for example, or is it that they're, as we talked earlier, is it eating when you're bored, or whatever it is? So the first thing to do is to get specific. So forget diets, because diets are a very scattergun approach. If some diets work for some people, and that's great, but they have this very scattergun quality of targeting your overall eating. Change it, maybe, checking out what's in your cupboards and shopping again. This is very different. This is saying a lot of the way that you eat is probably fine, but there will be things that are very specific that are keeping you at a weight that you're not comfortable with, or that you just feel out of control around eating. And if we can home in on what that is, and it may be a number of things, but even if it's a number of things, you start with one, and then it's tailored to the individual, so that people might really benefit from understanding a bit about any of these systems. But primarily it's about the person's own unhappiness and what will make most difference to them in terms of making changes, and starting with that.
Okay, and you assume that they have an intuitive or even a very explicit and obvious knowledge of, what am I doing wrong here? I kind of know I'm eating.
Yeah. People, in my experience, people do have that. What they don't necessarily have is awareness of the things that underlie that or underpin that. So, for example, we vary in our degree of interoceptive awareness, the degree to which we can tune in and notice what's happening in our bodies. One of the key things that can send that pattern down a trajectory as you're growing up, if you're exposed to a lot of trauma, then your nervous system is getting repeatedly overwhelmed, then your ability to tune in and notice what's happening in your body biologically to do with digestion may be slightly eclipsed by the need to detach or dissociate or switch off from overwhelming intensity internally. So it's about, once you can see what the particular starting point is with a particular eating behavior, you then start looking at what's beneath it.
And but you were talking before, the autonomic nervous system, our sense of stress, our sense of managing. And of course, with the vagus nerve, we know this, plus various other aspects of hormonal and endocrine system behaviors, affects the gut. So we get we affect the digestive processes as well. Is this something that becomes apparent, like in the work with people?
This is hugely important, yes. And I think one thing that is important is to mention and recognize that people vary in the extent to which they can readily adjust how they eat, because the hormonal signals the appetite hormonal signals, let alone the stress hormonal related signals, profoundly influence what's happening in terms of appetite drives. So it may be that one person is much more easily satisfied by food than another. So somebody who never really feels full is in a very different position than somebody who feels full quite soon because of what's happening in terms of appetite regulation. Same thing happens with hunger. Some people experience continual hunger, and others experience relatively infrequent sensations of hunger. So it's really important to recognize that these biological drivers to eating are not equally distributed, and that weight loss and weight regulation is absolutely not a level playing field.
Yeah, I'm much more able to, I'm just as observing mine, of course, we went through this process of the thing, but I'm much more able to eat a little bit of chocolate as a pleasantry than, and that not affect my weight as much as eating bread. So that's my particular gut, my particular reaction to weight loss, and it's kind of woohoo because that's kind of fun. Yeah. But it is interesting that whereas other people, you can eat bread till the cows come home. Other friends of mine, they have a piece of chocolate and poof, it's terrible. So it is. I appreciate this is very important to understand the individual nature of it.
Mm. Yeah. Our ongoing conversation, Richard, about client, receptivity and being individualistic. I mean, this is, we just mentioned before about diets and how, they're a bit hit and miss. I'm guessing that's because it's not a one size fits all. I mean, because we really need to have this individual approach, right?
That's right. And that's so interesting, that point, because what is happening in the world of nutrition is, which I'm not qualified in, but what's happening in the world of nutrition is moving very much, it seems, towards personalized nutrition and really looking at individualized responses to different foods, what Rich has just been talking about. But interestingly, in the world of psychology, moving towards process-based therapies and really, obviously therapy has always been individually based when we work with individuals, but framing and formulating things individually in terms of the particular processes, psychological processes that are keeping people stuck in very particular ways is relatively new. I'm thinking of Stephen Hayes's work on process-based therapy, and is really, the whole thing, I think, is really gaining a lot of momentum in terms of really appreciating the individual differences.
Yeah. And here we are once again, Richard, talking about the appreciation for complex systems.
Yes, it's interesting. I've just been reading a whole bunch of work in relation to what we call posthumanism, which everybody's a need to describe something differently. But essentially, one paper I was reading, and I just kept reading it, and I'm going, and he would say, "There's this problem." I said, "Yes, that's only a problem if you think in generalizing. If you actually think in the complex system and the individual framework, you begin to understand, but there are these generalizable aspects. I mean, insulin resistance, of course, is one that's terribly important, that drives this sense of need for hunger. I mean, it's too much for us to describe now, but it's just that when you eat a big sugar load, the body actually shuts down from receiving it and burning it up because it almost thinks it's a poison. And as soon as the sugar gets shifted off into the fat cells, all the cells open up again and saying, oh, great, everything's not so bad anymore, but I'm still hungry. So these sort of rotating hunger pangs are something that people have difficulty really grasping and settling down with.
And again, people's responses, the degree of insulin resistance between people will vary. It's not something I'm expert in. It's much more to do. There's a lot to be understood about insulin resistance, and it certainly seems to be something that's really important for many people in understanding their difficulties about weight regulation. But it's one of many biological processes that contribute to difficulties with weight regulation, certainly.
Yeah, and your focus is from what I hear, strongly on the psychological aspects, on those sorts of areas of the way you think and the way you process oriented aspects.
Yes.
So yeah, that's so interesting, Helen. There's so much interesting, but actually time is always our not our enemy, but I think it's we want people to get things in a solid bite, and we've said some fabulous stuff, but we are running out of our bandwidth here. Is there something we've missed, or is there something you just a roundup that you could give us as we leave people, because we know that they can go to the holistic conference and have a listen to you very shortly?
What I'd say to fellow professionals from all disciplines is that 12 years ago, when I started this work, I had no idea how much work and research there is going on in experimental psychology and applied psychology to do with mechanisms that affect how we eat. And the more I've learned about this, the memory processes, attentional processes, all sorts of the things that are mainstream psychology, the influences that those things have on our eating is really empowering for people to understand more about. And when, as professionals, we can share this knowledge and research with our clients or patients, it helps them to frame the struggles they've got around eating, understand that those struggles are completely understandable and adaptable, and that if they focus on making one change at a time, equipped with the knowledge and understanding of why this thing is being maintained and maybe why it developed, but particularly why this pattern is being maintained, it is really liberating. It's wonderfully life-changing, because when you can change something like your relationship to food, a lot of other things change as well. And you're not overhauling everything. You're just getting changes that you value in the way that you deal with eating and food.
Wonderful. And it potentially affects all of life. So grand work and wonderful work. And of course, a huge problem that people constantly try and manage. So thank you so much for sharing what you've got. And we're really looking forward to seeing your full presentation at the Holistic Recovery Summit. And that's wonderful. So pretty useful, Matt.
Absolutely. Dr. Helen McCarthy, thank you so much for joining us here on the Science of Psychotherapy, and really look forward to hearing you at the summit.
Thank you. It's been great. Lovely questions. Thank you.
So, as I say, we've got the links in our website. If you're on our mailing list, you'll get that. If you're not on our mailing list, jump in on our Science of Psychotherapy website and sign into the mailing list. Fabulous things coming out to you on a regular basis.
Fantastic. And we will get Dr. Helen McCarthy back on the show to do a bit more of a deep dive into this topic, because I reckon we've got a lot to talk about on this topic. But in the meantime, as Richard said, jump down into the show notes there. There will be a link there to the Holistic Recovery Summit. It's all free. Jump in, have a look. You won't be disappointed.
Absolutely not, Matt. It's fabulous. Anyway, for now, though, I think we've done our bit. So I'm going to say goodbye for the first time. So bye for now, and back to you.
Okay, see you later. Bye-bye.